Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. We continue today's class where we left off on page 114. In the original text, you can see it as well in the corresponding English text. As usual, we remind everybody, those who are newcomers, you could see all these classes on this very website, koshertubka.com, as well as tanyaonline.com, the advantage of the latter website, that you can see all the previous classes in a very organized manner, follow them easily, and different topics which are spoken in one chapter in brief. You could pick up on different chapters, which is alluded to, even this idea that we're learning today, again, the scroll bar, easy to follow in the previous classes. So we left off the last class on the very last words of Nun Zayin, the Isira v'Isira, which Alter Rebbe speaks about the importance, the essentiality of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The premise of our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu ought to be through Yiras Hashem, again in the very beginning of chapter Mem Aleph, the 41st chapter, which we're learning today, and the importance that this is on the underlines every type of our Avodah, and the Alter Rebbe left off over here that when somebody doesn't feel that reverence in his nefesh, in other words, he doesn't have that actual sensation of yira, but nonetheless, when a person holds himself back from doing any sin with the most minimal yiras Hashem, in other words, it's not a full, rich, if you will, appreciation of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a way that the person could arouse within himself a full sensation of yira, of awe, fear, reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but nonetheless, the fact that he holds himself back, that he has some type of consciousness of not to sin, that itself, somewhat one way or another, because he has a certain discomfort or yira, a certain fear, even on a very elemental, basic manner, it's also considered yira, it's also considered, in the end of the day, a fear. And Alter Rebbe brings a proof from this Gemara, famous Gemara, Yechanan ben Zakkai, before he passes away. He tells the students, Yehi Ratzon, shall it be the will of Hashem, She'yameira Shamayim Aleichem, Kemeira Basav Adam, that the fear of God upon you should be like the fear of flesh and blood, of a human being, ultimately. As the Alter Rebbe continues, Teidu Kisha Adam Eber Aveira, he quotes that when a person sins, he says, I hope no human being saw me. So Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai was telling his Talmidim, not necessarily his disciples, not necessarily is Yiras Hashem something needs to be. In other words, it needs to start with a deep and profound sensation of reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but even this was his message, which was unique on its own, when his Talmidim, his disciples, and you're talking about Talmidim of this grand giant, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai, what he didn't have, they were expecting something much greater than just apparently telling them, or apparently they were expecting something much greater of just telling them, fear God like you fear a human being. Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai, together with his scholarship and by piety and unique giant, which he was in Torah and in every area, his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu was dveikus in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in his oneness with the Almighty. He felt that it's important not only for these students but for the message throughout all generations, that a person must know that in the end of the day, even he can't lift himself up. He doesn't identify profoundly with a profound message of Yiras Hashem the way it's meant to be, fearing Hashem the way it's truly meant to be, or a deeper, a more profound level of Yira, of fear. Nonetheless, he should know that there is the simple fear, and if that would ultimately prevent him from doing a sin, from sinning or violating, transgressing the word of Hashem, that's a startup, that's a starting point, and that ultimately is as well called Yira. When someone is intimidated by another person in a way that he would prevent not to himself, not to do something because another human being is in the room, or another human being is watching over him, and he's able to establish that same sentiment of fear with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that's a starting point. That's good, because in the end of the day, it's an expression of yira. At the end of the day, it's an expression of fear. So it's, if not the real deal fear, which the Alter Rebbe is alluding to towards the beginning of the chapter, and which the Alter Rebbe feels that within the neshama there is ultimately that chip of fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a deeper level of fear, a deeper level of reverence. Nonetheless, he should know that even if you don't feel that, you don't have that sensation, there is yira, and there is yira. There's, at the end of the day, you're fearing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at least similar that you have fear of another human being, not to sin, ultimately to prevent yourself from sinning, from violating any of the 365 commandments, and your performance of the 248 commandments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, just to point out this, which the Alter Rebbe emphasized at the beginning of the chapter, even though to the latter, which is the 248 mitzvahs aseh, it's about an expression of love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but even to be constantly on top of our obligations of learning Torah and doing Hashem's mitzvahs, underlining that very love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be a fear that I never compromise, and I'm always on the go, and I'm always doing what I have to do. As the Alter Rebbe explains, again, you can see it in the beginning of the classes, the beginning of this very chapter, how crucial and how essential it is that beyond the love, or before the love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which usually leads to a yid to learn Hashem's Torah, to do his mitzvahs, there must be a basic yiras Hashem, a fear that Hashem is the king and I will never rebel in him. May it be in this which he tells me not to do, chas v'shalom, or even this which he tells me to do, if the beginning, the reishis ha'aveda, the emphasis, the underlining motivation, or the underlining, what has to be, what is meant to underline the entire Avodas Hashem, has to be a fear, a reverence, knowing of Hashem, knowing that He is a king, and I fear to rebel, chas v'shalom, not only to do something what He asks me not to do, but to be constantly on duty and on guard on this which He asks me to do. And Alter Rebbe continues, this is where we're holding, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'shakel niyeh b'dvarim. And this is where, and this where we're holding on the top of page 114, a yira klal, without fear at all, leiparcha le'ela. The neshama can't ascend on high, be'ava levada, just with love. Just like a bird cannot fly with one wing. As Alter Rebbe brought this before as well, that fear and love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these are considered two wings, like it says in Tikkunim, like it's brought in Zehar, that he compares the Ava V'yira to the two wings of a bird. There he explained, Alter Rebbe as well elaborated on this towards the end of Perek Mem that it's the most important part. In other words, even when you look at the bird is, it could be, even in halacha, the bird does not become disqualified, is not rendered treif if it loses or if its wings are taken off, because the main thing is the bird itself, the flesh of the bird, the structure of the bird, and on top of that there's the wings. And similarly, a Yid has to know the main thing is to do what Hashem wants, which is the learning Torah, the substance, which is the learning Torah, the shaking the lulav and esrog, the putting on tefillin, and doing the mitzvahs. On top of that, Hashem says, I want you to carry the wings. I want you to do the Torah mitzvahs with love and fear, or tchil urchim, with fear and love. And the point of it is, because it's important that the Torah mitzvahs are elevated on high. Again, as the Alter Rebbe explains this in depth, in the end of Perek Mem, the end of the 40th chapter, one could easily go back to, again on this very website, to see the importance of Torah mitzvahs ascending on high, becoming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Alter Rebbe has this again, elaborates on this, which you're welcome as well to go to the chapter 16, towards the end of 16. Also, the Alter Rebbe explains the significance of a mitzvah done with ava, with yira, with fear, with love, because it elevates the mitzvah on high, similar to the bird is able to soar on high precisely with its wings. So too, the importance, the significance of a mitzvah done not only with ava itself, with love, because in the end that's similar to a bird which has one wing, and we know a bird cannot elevate itself on high with one wing. It can't soar, it can't fly with one wing. So too in our service to God, based, and again, we're not going to elaborate over here because we explained it thoroughly there, these different chapters. I think 16 rather, the end of the 40th chapter, the importance of the neshama of the Torah mitzvahs, or which the neshama, the Yid performs, that it doesn't remain on ground level, like the bird, which is complete, which in this case the Torah is the most important, the learning of the Torah is most important, the fulfilling of the mitzvahs is the most important. Again, the bird, it's a complete bird, halachically it's a complete bird, even the wings are taken off, you can shecht it, and it's kosher, it's not considered enough of a blemish which would disqualify the bird of being kosher. So too the main part of our service is about the substance, the learning Torah, the doing mitzvahs, but then there's a whole dimension, the whole dynamic of the Torah mitzvahs being elevated on high, simply becoming closer and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we explained then as well, the difference of even a relationship with two people. When you give someone a gift, it's important, the sentiment, the sentimental energy which is infused in the very gift that you're giving the other party. Obviously the gift is what the other party appreciates, but the sentiment invested in the gift reflects forever, for that matter, in the relationship between the giver and the recipient. And so too, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's important that the Torah mitzvahs are elevated on high and enters yet deeper and yet deeper elements within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, as explained and elaborated. So back to the deficiency, or back to this point of the deficiency of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with an expression of one level, one sentiment, which is a sentiment of love, is not enough. Just like a bird cannot fly with one wing. As we mentioned again, tchil urchim, love and fear, are trei gadfim, are two wings. And therefore, a person can't say, well, I serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, with a sentiment of love, and therefore, perhaps I'm elevating the Torah mitzvahs as well on high. But if you compare it, if you follow the comparison of the Zohar of Ava, Yira, and Ava, the two wings of a bird cannot fly with one wing, as we know it evidently. So too the Yira, and then therefore we need not only the Ava, the love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's equally important the Yira of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So too, when it comes to Chena Yira Levado, conversely, when a person serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu solely with fear, without love, it's also a Knaf Echad, it's also one bird, also V'lei Parcha Ba'Le'ela. Now the Alter Rebbe is coming he's turning over here from the previous message. As much as the message of Perek Mem Aleph and Tanya is about serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with fear, with awe, and therefore the Alter Rebbe is saying love itself is not enough. The Alter Rebbe right now comes around and says we should know that fear as well as all is also not sufficient, because fear in the end of the day is also one wing, and a bird, just like a bird cannot fly with one wing, may it be avo, so it cannot fly with one wing when it's yira as well. Even though nikra v'edas eved, it's called the servitude of a servant, and Alter Rebbe's message over here of the great advantage and the great virtue of a yid coming on to the arena of Avodas Hashem with that notion, with that attitude of avdus, of servitude. And again, this is the primary virtue which the Alter Rebbe elaborates and expands in this very Perek. So even though here there's something very special about him serving HaKadosh, demonstrating his service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is precisely expressed with the sentiment of fear as opposed to the sentiment of love, as explained so many times in Chassidus, that in the end of the day, the true bittul of a yid to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the ultimate purpose of a yid annulling himself in submitting himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, comes through fear per se, not so much love, as is explained in the expression in Chassidus, that there's yeshmi, when it comes to love, there's a lot of it of myself involved, my own somewhat, you could even use the word ego, but it's not about ego because it's not fully an expression of ego, obviously, because you're talking about a yid wants to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but subtly there's this something of a self-recognition, a selfness over here, as I love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The whole expression of love is I love. Conversely, fear it's not about me. It's about contraction of myself. That is the simple expression of the sensation of fear, awe, reverence. I crunch. I become less and less expression. My expression is the whole expression rather of fear is of myself contracting, which is the whole experience of fear. When someone comes into a king, when he experiences true reverence, true some sentiment of reverence, fear and awe, it's about contraction of oneself, not expansion of oneself, as opposed to love is all about expansion. I love, and the more the person is involved, the more the person is able to express his love, even it's for something else, for someone else, or another entity. In this case, in dealing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but to a certain extent, it's a certain expansion of oneself. I love, and the more the love, the more, from a certain perspective and point of view, there is expansion of self, and as opposed to yira. So and this is the main message of the Alter Rebbe in this very chapter about the Avodas Eved, is about the submission, is about the servitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So even though again this stands out, this is the message of this very chapter, the Alter Rebbe says we have to know that yira levado, that fear on its own is also one wing, and we cannot fly, we cannot ascend to HaKadosh Baruch Hu only with one wing in this way as well. And we have to as well try to arouse and evoke within ourselves a love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, despite the yira is clearly a demonstration of avdus, of servitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yet more than ava, more than love, based on this which we just explained. And v'tzarech is gamkin bichinis ben. A person has to also arouse within himself the level of a son to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to feel that he's not only a eved, a servant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is primarily expressed through fear, but also the relationship must express itself in a way that I'm a son of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a child's relationship with his parents. True, there's a expression, or there's an underlining in the relationship. There's an underlining thread of fear as well, but primarily a son to a parent, it's about loving his father, it's about loving his mother. And the same thing, it has to arouse that level of ben, of son to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, la'oder ha'ava TV, sakol ponim, ha'mususeres belibe, to arouse the innate love, the natural and innate love, at least, because obviously within love there's so many multiple rather different levels of love, as Alter Rebbe explains in different parts of the Tanya, particularly in these chapters. So it's important, namely, it would even add, namely, the Alter Rebbe explains it later in the chapters of Mem, in the chapters rather towards Mem Aleph, Mem Beis, Mem Gimel, Mem Dalet, and so on. So in the give or take in these 10 chapters from Mem to Nun, but then again the multiple expressions of love, multiple levels of love. But Alter Rebbe says at least to arouse the innate, basic, natural love every Yid has to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is hidden in the heart of a Yid, that he should be conscientious about it. Akoponim, at least lisker avosel Hashem echad, to remember the love to the one Hashem b'machshavti v'rtzainei, in his thoughts, even though he can't bring that expression of love to a full state of sensation, but nonetheless he should at least have this formed in his mind, in his thoughts, v'rtzainei, in his desire, in his motive, the dovko bei, in his motivation, l'davka b'yizbarach, to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, who says, in a sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls us avodim? Hashem says, avadatem, li b'nei Yisrael avodim, that we are called avodim, servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is our master, and therefore we have to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with fear, primarily because we are Avdei Hashem, and Avdei Hashem is synonymous, Avdus, servitude, is synonymous with the expression of fear. So who says, Bechlal, that we have to find love in our relationship? But the Alter Rebbe says clearly, Tzorech li'is gam b'chinas ben. The fact is that we are, by Hashem Himself, the same God, which calls us, which identifies us as avodim, kili b'nei Yisrael avodim, and therefore that we are His servants, and therefore we are meant to express ours on a constant basis. And again, this is an underlining thread which has to come across all our entire Avodas Hashem, that it's in the end of the day about servitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like a eved to his master, like a servant to his master. Yet the same God, the same Hashem, the same Torah defines Am Yisrael as bani matem Hashem alikechem. You are children to Hashem, and the relationship between a child and a parent is predominantly about love, not about fear, and therefore a Yid has to also find that experience of the relationship of a son to a father as well in his Avodas Hashem, to arouse that innate love which is hidden in the heart of the Yid, that should be as well, galus meiche, that should be manifest, that should be in a revealed manner, at least in his meiche. If he cannot arouse that passion, the sensation of love, the way it would express in itself passionately to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the idea of love. Love is, the true love is about an expansion of passion. But if a person cannot reach that level, to have a booming love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a passionate love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at least you should be conscientious about it, to remember his love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the one Hashem, at least in his thoughts and in his ratzain, in his desire to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This idea of the different levels of love, again spoken in the areas in the 40th to 50th chapter. The Alter Rebbe has this as well mentioned in the very chapters Yud Zayin Tezayin, Yud Zayin, which is 16, 17, and 18, which there he speaks about these taps in, or more so, elaborates on these different levels of love which exist, namely the difference of an innate love, the inherent love a yid has to the Eibishter, because we are banim, we are truly children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A child has this innate love to his parents, inherent love to his parents. So even though not always is it expressed, does it come from a state of hiddenness, or a natural state to a passionate state, to a passionate expression? Not always. Many times it does, and it's meant to, but there the Alter Rebbe says, irrelevant. In the end of the day, a child is a child, even though he doesn't express his passionate love to his parents. He's still a child, and therefore there's always the natural and innate love he has to his parents, because he is a child, he or she is a child of these parents. And therefore, and similarly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is we are children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as the Alter Rebbe explains there, we have this innate love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have this inherent love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, the optimal expression of this love is when it expresses itself with a passion, with a love and passion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a revealed and manifest, and again, passionate love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's certainly the optimal expression of love, but nonetheless, even if it doesn't express itself in a revealed manner, in a passionate manner, nonetheless, it exists, that we are connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a way of ben. In other words, similar to a child. In other words, we have that ben dimension, that ben aspect, ben dynamic, child dynamic with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, similar to a child which has an inherent and innate love to his parents. So if it doesn't come out his galus mechev v'libay, namely if it does not manifest in his heart as a passionate love, but at least the machshavta v'ritzayin, his thought and his motivation, his desire to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as such, which is ultimately the expression of love, which is as well important in order to elevate the Torah mitzvahs, that it should again and again, that it should have both elements, the element of fear and the element of love. Similarly, like a bird, in order for the bird to soar on high, it needs both wings. This should be the intent of the Yid when he occupies himself in learning Torah, occupies himself in his Torah, or the mitzvah, or that mitzvah that he's performing. L'dovka by, to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nafshay elikis, his godly soul, ve'chayunis, and the animal soul, or the soul which gives him life, which is again ultimately the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, ulvushein, and their garments, which is the thought, speech, and action, of the godly soul, but as well the thought, speech, and action, even the animalistic soul, which is which nefesh elikis, the godly soul, invests in the animal soul. Again, these are points which were spoken about and elaborated in length in previous classes. The nefesh elikis invests in the nefesh habahamis and ultimately works together with the nefesh habahamis, with the animal soul, in his service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hence the entire thought, speech, and action, which are the garments of the soul, may it be the godly and the animal soul, are as well involved in cleaving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu via this learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, with that motivation of love, at least the love which is behis galus meiche, at least the conscientious, or love which he's conscientious about in his thought, or v'ritzaynei, or in his desire l'davka beis baruch, to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe goes on, he says, not only the person himself should feel that sense of minimal, at least again, a minimal expression of love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he should cleave in his appreciation of his cleaving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu via his learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. That person also has to be aware of the broader picture, the broader understanding and appreciation of the relationship of the Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what he says. A person should never take himself out of the klal, out of the general and rule and approach to this relationship, and therefore l'chein yiskaven liyachad l'dovka be'yizbarach makir nefshalikis u'makir nefashis kol yisrael shurach pi be'yizbarach anikar b'shem shchino Hashem sheshechenes mislabeshes teich kolam min lach yesel l'kaimon v'hi hamashpaz bekeich hadibur azu shebedaber b'divrei Torah oikeich ha'maisa zel lasis mitzvah zu. And this would be the connection of that force with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is he saying over here? It's saying that in the end of it, as we know, there's the different dimensions within HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And again, this was spoken about in length in previous classes of the difference of Memalik Kol Almin attributed to the level of Malchus Shalav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Seiviv Kol Almin, which is beyond Malchus, the areas where the Eibishter is for himself, by himself. And again, when we say Memalik Kol Almin is a dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu which is contracted, the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is contracted and is concealed and condensed in order to enter or create this new phenomenon which would be called Eilamis, worlds, and every world with its multifaceted the dimensions within every single world and different multifaceted layers and dimensions, and as we could appreciate even from Elam Hazah Gashmi, this very physical world, millions and billions of different types of creations, creatures and creations in Hashem's world, which Hashem himself deals with every single one specifically, which again is demonstrative of the Eir being kaviyachal conformed to the realities and the differences and the limitations of every single creature. When you speak about a creature, it has a particular format and a particular expression. We're dealing with something which is totally limited. The whole notion of Hashem connecting to a world, creating a world, is a great yirida, is a great degradation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to leave, so to say, his state of being the Ein Sof, the infinite, limitless light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, condensing himself to become a creator. Famous expression of the great Mekubal, Lezo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is not the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he's a Beirei Eilam, is that he's a creator of Eilamis, he's a creator of worlds. To the contrary, it's a great Yerida, it's a great descend of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to leave the domain of Ein Sof and ultimately enter into a new area which would deal with something which is by definition inferior. The Gemara says Eilam is Melashon Helam v'Hester. So when you see a world with all its complexities and with all its grand appearances, in the end of the day, it's a Eilam, it's a world which conceals over the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The mere makeup, the mere texture of Eilam is Melashon Helam v'Hester, and rightfully so, because Eilam, when you talk about a world, everything about world, any world, we can appreciate it evidently from this very physical world. As great and as complex the Nivraim, the creations in this world are, they're all limited in the fact that they have their shape, their form. This doesn't exist in the Ein Sof, understandably so, because Ein Sof is Ein Sof. It's limitless. It doesn't have any definition, and everything in this world is defined. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's a particular style, the way it expresses itself. The apple doesn't look like the orange doesn't look like the apple. So, despite the excitement in all this, Morabu Masecha Hashem, like David HaMelech said, how much or how many, he was glorifying the multiple dimensions which exist within Elam Hazeh. But nonetheless, in the end of the day, it's the way the Eibishter leaves his state, the way he's for himself by himself, and condenses himself into a new reality, which in the terms of Chassidus, it's Malchus, which becomes, like we say in Asher, Malchuscha Malchus Kol Elamim. As Alter Rebbe explains in Shar Yichud Emunah, beyond Malchus, which again, Malchus is the last of Hashem's 10 Sfirot, which we have Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chesed, Yisei, Malchus, which is as well explained in other opportunities in these classes of what do they represent, these 10 Sfirot. But beyond Malchus, the whole phenomenon of time and place and reality of Eilamus do not exist. As Dr. Rebbe again explains in Shar Yichud Emunah, the second part of Tanya. So the Malchus becomes Malchus Chamalchus Kol Elamim, which it condenses the energy of the Ein Sof in order to form a new type of source of life, which is again this defined in Chassidus and Kabbalah, Memala Kol Almin. It's the way the Eibishter becomes a Memale, the Eibishter becomes a creator, the Eibishter becomes it's a force which deals with, force within Hashem, which deals with this inferior, which was called Eilamus, even the supreme Eilamus. Gan Eden, Ha'elyon, Gan Eden, Ha'tachton, these are all Eilamus, which has become subsequent and consequent to Hashem condensing himself in this expression, in this midah, in this character, in this attribute of Malchus. As Dr. Rebbe points this out, even in the word Malchus, we find the whole idea of time. As we know, time is a creation, just came about in the time when Hashem created everything. At the same time Hashem created space, he created time. Time is a creation. It didn't exist prior to the creation of the world. And you see it in the word Malchus. You see Malchus, you have Hashem Melech, Hashem Molech, Hashem Yimlech. The whole notion of past, present, and future exists only within Malchus. Beyond that, which is again classically the experience or the sensation of the levels beyond Malchus, is the Shem Hashem, Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And Yud Kei Vav Kei, Shem Hashem, is Hoya Hoive V'Yeh, stands for Hoya Hoive V'Yeh Ke'echad. Past, present, and future are like one. The whole idea of time and similarly space doesn't exist beyond Malchus, because when you're dealing the way the Eibishter is for himself by himself, that's an expression of Ein Sof. Time, past, present, future, definitions. The whole concept of finitude doesn't exist beyond Malchus. So back to what we're saying over here is in the end of the day, Hashem wants the two energies to mesh, to fuse together, and that becomes ultimately the purpose of creation. And again, we spoke about this in the past. And we say every day before davening, and many people say before doing any mitzvah, which is really, those who don't say before any mitzvah, it's meant to, it's because when they start their day before Baruch Hashem, before they start davening, they say L'Shem Yichud Kudsha B'richu Shchinte. It ultimately applies, it's meant to include every mitzvah or every learning Torah that the person would learn, or every mitzvah he would perform till the next day, when he again says L'Shem Yichud. But what is he ultimately saying? He's establishing the mission statement, why Hashem created this world, why Hashem put us in this world, what is our mandate, and how we bring about the execution of this mandate, how we execute this mandate via our learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. And this is really encapsulated in this statement, L'Shem Yichud. You know I am doing all these mitzvahs in the next 24 hours in order to unite the two energies, the energy of Kudsha B'richu and the energy of Shchinte. that they should ultimately fuse and they should ultimately come together, and that's the purpose of creation. Hashem created the world, Basar Mamoris Nivra Ha'olam. He entered into the world of speech. He entered in the world of Ma'amores, precisely this type of speech, which is expressing himself, lowering himself into that world, or into that expression of Ma'amarot, which is synonymous with Malchus. Just like a king primarily expresses himself through, he leads his country through his words, so too HaKadosh Baruch Hu invested in Ma'amarot, in sayings, in order to create all the Elamis, all the worlds, including Elam Hazeh. Like it says, Basar Mamoris Nivra Ha'olam, and Hashem investing in creation. Wait just a quick moment. Please pardon. So Hashem investing in Asar Mamoris, expression in Zayar is Hashem is Yored, he descends, just like a person. There's a person who waits for himself by himself, and then he wants to, for whatever reason, convey or interact with another party. So the other party is, the fact that he's connecting with another party is in a sense going away from himself, the way he's for himself by himself, and relating to somebody else, introducing somebody else into his experience. And with that, primarily, the person would use the faculty of speech. I talk in order to interact, to convey, to deal with another party. So it's again, the whole idea of speech is the way I go away from myself, the way I am for myself, by myself, for myself, and relate to somebody else. And the person does it primarily through speech. So Hashem, to leave that sensation of Ein Sof, primarily he expressed it through Malchus, which is about, like it says in Pasuk Eliyah, Malchus is about Malchus Peh. Malchus is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking. And therefore, when we speak about creation, primarily the Mishnah points out, how did creation come to be? Basar Ma'amoris Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created with 10 sayings. It's the saying, again, as we mentioned by definition, when you speak about a saying, a talk, a word is the way you leave yourself the way you're for yourself, by yourself and for yourself, and deal with another party. In this case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu leaves that sensation of Ein Sof, condenses the Ein Sof in order to express himself in words, which again is kind of leaving his own experience, or the way he is primarily, the way he is, Hashem is, experiences, or that whole experience of Ein Sof, leaving that sensation and entering into new reality of condensing the infinite light of himself in order to put it into words, which is again putting a concept, a expression, a sensation into words, is already condensing oneself, one's energy, one's personal experience into words. It's already a descent, it's a yerida, it's a degradation, it's a degradation of self in order to relate to something else. And by the hence, Basar Mamoris, what do you have in the end? Nivra Ha'olam. The worlds were created. This world was created. And again, Olam, as the Gemara says, is by definition, Melashon Hel and Behester, it covers up. It can't, by definition, express the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the true infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the whole Olam came about through the Asar Mamarot, HaKadosh Baruch Hu condensing his Ein Sof, Nis, if you will, and placing it into words. Therefore, it says in Zayar, it says, Lav urcha de malka lishtoi b'mila dehedyete. These words of Asar Mamoris are inferior, because it's the way they wish to going away from himself in order to deal with a new reality, or create a new reality called Olamus. So, the literal translation that it's not something to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu with, or define HaKadosh Baruch Hu with this, which by definition is the way it came to be, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the maximum and the most profound descent in the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That would be a means to praise, or an entity, or to identify that in the praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Quite to the contrary. If you're talking about, for example, somebody who is a multi-billionaire, and you say, you know what, he has so much money, I saw that he was carrying a $50 bill. It's a busha, it's a embarrassment. Though here you're dealing with a quantitative, or the embarrassment expresses itself because of the quantitative difference of the billions of dollars as opposed to the $50 bill. And if someone's not used to seeing a stack of $100 bills, and he saw it, and this person pulled out his wallet as an example, it could be exciting for the regular person to see so many hundreds of dollars of bills, or $50 bills, and $100 bills. But this is not a praise to the multi-billionaire. And again, here the differences are just quantitative. When you're dealing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the whole idea that he created a world is the greatest yirida, the greatest descent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He removes himself from his Ein Sof position and invests in a finite expression, which is the Asara Mamoris. So this Asara Mamoris, as we know, as mentioned in the past as well, is called the Shechina. Shechina comes from the expression Shochenet u'mislabeshes. It invests, it dwells, it deals with the confinements of the area that it goes to and creates. And then we have the Kutchubrichu, which the way the Eibushter is Kodesh u'Baruch. Kodesh means sanctified, removed. And that's an expression of the way the Eibushter is for himself, by himself, of the Seviv Kolam, and the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the entire world, and he gave us the mandate that we should fuse the two. That in one hand, and this is the purpose of creation, like it says in Medrash Tanchuma, Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyis ledira b'tachtenim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted a dwelling place in this very physical world. So therefore he created this very physical world. Therefore he did something which was the greatest yirida within himself, the greatest expression of removing himself, the greatest expression of degradation, or degrading himself from the way he's for himself, by himself, and again the entire sensation about being the Ein Sof, and condensing himself in something so inferior of the Asar Mamaris, which creates an Eilam Melashon Helam Behester. So this becomes Tachtonim. Again, these are points which we spoke about much in the past. Tachtonim, meaning to say, becomes a situation which is devoid, overtly devoid of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the Ein Sof, because it's a production of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's condensement, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's concealing himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's contraction of self. And there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, there I want an abode. I want this to become my domicile, like my home, a place where I feel comfortable, a world which would ultimately express the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, after many years of HaKadosh Baruch Hu creation, the Olam stood devoid of this important message, or the devoid of the Ein Sof. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah. And this is the whole point of Matan Torah. Hashem comes and exposes himself, the true self of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and stands in front of every single Yid and says, Anochi Hashem Elikecha, that I am. It's not about the Shem Elokim, and it's not about the Malchus, it's not where the beginning, it's not where it ends. Quite to the contrary, this is the greatest Yirida of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the real me is the Anochi Hashem Elikecha. Or if it's Anochi, or it's Hashem, which is Shem Havaya, which is Hayahevi Ke'echa, the way the Ein Sof is the true expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or deeper yet, like it says in Zohar, Onechi, the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is beyond any definition and beyond any description, and that becomes Elikecha. This becomes Kechacha v'chayesecha, your strength and your energy and your vitality, your energy of vitality. And this is what Torah is all about. Torah Hashem put his entire Anechi. The Gemara says Anechi is an acronym, Anan Nafshi Ksabis Yavis. I put my whole soul, Hashem, I wrote it into Torah. I gave it into Torah. I wrote it into Torah. I gave it over to you. And this was the Chidush, and this was, finally we came to a state that we're exposed to the Ein Sof, which did not exist till now. Certainly not in the world in its entirety, not even by Am Yisrael. And that was the whole point, that Am Yisrael starts learning Torah, starts connecting to the Shema, the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is embedded in Torah, embedded in every mitzvah. And what happens is the two forces, a world which is a product of Shem Elikim, a world is a product of Malchus, which is the level of Shchinte, connects with Kutsha Brichu, the way the Eibishter is removed, transcendent, the Ein Sof. The point is the Yichud, the oneness of the two forces, Kutsha Brichu and Shchinte together, which comes about through a Yid. On one hand, he lives in this physical Elam Hazeh, which is again a mere product of Malchus, a mere product of Memala Kolam, the inferior force of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he connects through his learning Torah and doing mitzvahs with the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And more so, the mitzvahs that he performs is not only because he, not only because he lives in Elam Hazeh, which is a product of Memala Kolam, of the expression, dimension rather, of Shechina, but more so, the mitzvahs that he performs are all with the materials of Elam Hazeh. The tefillin comes from the parchment of the animal, the ink comes from the tree, and the tzitzis comes from the wool of a lamb, and so on and so forth, which is a significant majority of our mitzvahs, is dealing with the physical world. It's the lulav and the esrog, but we say, till Matan Torah, there was this separation. We looked at you as a mere product of Mamalik Kolalman, which is, in the way the Eibishter is removed from this, it's a removal, Kaviyachol, so to say, of the Ein Sof. It's a product of the most inferior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Asara Mamoris, the way Eibishter leaving himself and dealing with something else, which ultimately created a world which is Melashon Helam Behestel, like would say, a world which conceals over this true reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was till Matan Torah. Matan Torah, Hashem pulled open the window and says, now you have the ability to connect to the true Ein Sof, to the way I am for myself, by myself, which is the level of Kutsha Brichu, Kodesh, removed, again transcendent. And that's the point of our whole living the life of Torah mitzvahs, in order to fuse the two. And therefore we begin the day, when we start this service, when we start with our Avodas Hashem, we say, L'shem yichud kutsha brichu shchinte. The whole point is to mesh the two, that the two come together, that the sensation of the Ein Sof should be felt in this world. Now, before Mashiach comes, everything is happening, it's being accomplished, but nonetheless we don't yet feel that, see that sensation. Mashiach will come, it will be everything which we invested by our learning Torah and doing mitzvahs in the last 3,300 years, ultimately will come to a state of manifestation, fruition, manifestation, meaning to say we will see the world itself, we'll be able to identify the Ein Sof evidently, and not only in the life of the Yid, like we say every single day in Daven, Yakiru v'yedu kol yeshvei sevel, or we say Umola ha'oretz de'as Hashem, the entire world will be filled with the Deya, not of Elikim, but De'as Hashem. They'll be able to experience the Shem Hashem, which really began in the very beginning, in the procedure, even pre-Matan Torah, V'yedu Mitzrayim Kani Hashem. Pari said that he appreciates Elokim, Etzba Elokim he. Yes, he was able to identify God in the context of Elokim, the inferior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the whole point is, V'yedu Mitzrayim Kani Hashem, that even Mitzrayim should be able to tap in, to be able to identify the Hashem, which again, followed by Matan Torah, which then it all began, and eventually you have a world an entire world which identifies the Shem Hashem. Mol ha'oretz deis Hashem kamayim liyam mechasim. By Hashem lemelech hakol ha'oretz.